Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's been a while. Let's go ahead and say a prayer, and then we'll get into it. Yahuwah, may you guide this study tonight in your ruach and in your wisdom. And may you not allow me to speak from a place of emotion, but from a place of unbiased and just perspective. May you give clarity to I and your servants as we dive into this study. And Yahuwah, if this thing isn't from you, may we come to that conclusion as a body, one body, in full unity with your ruach of knowledge and truth. All praise and thanksgiving goes to you, Yahuwah. You are merciful and a just El. We love you so much, Yahuwah. In Yahusha's name we pray. Amen. All right. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Torah Truth Fellowship of Yahusha. I am your host, Brianna. And tonight, this week, we are going to study out the memorial celebration of Hanukkah. Now, there is no agenda with this video. This is not a video of me telling you why you should celebrate this day or you should celebrate this day or whatever. This is just a study. We're going to learn about the history of Hanukkah, and we're going to learn if this thing should be observed or not. So let's go ahead and study it out. We are going to carefully study this out in the books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees. So, what is Hanukkah? Did Yahusha condemn this feast? Is Hanukkah a sin? And is there any prophecy behind Hanukkah, or any other dedication ceremony? These are many questions that I presented to myself upon beginning this study, and I was determined to find answers, and I surely did. And I want to make it known, too, that this is something I'm still studying, okay? So this is not a complete study. This study is still ongoing. This is just what I have learned so far. So first, let's begin with Hanukkah is not the fabricated story that you've heard your entire life. There was no miracle oil that burned for 8 days. That is 100% from the Babylonian Talmud, and it wasn't added until 600 years after the books of the Maccabees were written. The books of the Maccabees don't say anything about this miracle oil, which in my opinion would be worth mentioning, don't you think? I think that's pretty noteworthy. Thus concluding that the Talmud added to the story, which makes sense because Judaism doesn't even recognize the books of the Maccabees as scripture, so how ironic. To really understand this story, we must understand history and what was going on in Jerusalem at this time. During this time period, it was called the Hellenistic era. And this actually carried over into the time of the Messiah and the apostles as well, which wasn't long, actually, after this story takes place. Hellenization was a Greek concept on the way that they viewed their gods and like concepts of the spiritual world, like heaven, hell, angels, faith, etc. One big thing that stuck with Hellenization was the concept of faith. It is a Hellenistic view that faith is just something that you believe and nothing more. In Hebrew, faith is a verb. It is an action. It is a fruit of your belief, if you will. It is to hear and to do. Anyways, so Greece was Hellenizing the crap out of all of the countries that they overtook, Jerusalem included. And King Antiochus, he led a raid in Jerusalem where he destroyed the city. He stole everything out of the temple. He trashed the temple. He kidnapped people. And then he set things on fire. And then he left. Him and his people, they left. Well, he left some men to, desecrate the temple and stuff like that. But he left. And then 2 years later, he came back. He sent one of his men back to make a covenant with the religious leaders that were in Jerusalem. It says right here in 1st Maccabees 1, lines 29 and 30. After 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Yehud, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spoke peaceable words unto them, but all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city, and smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Yasharal. And then 1 Maccabees 1, 41 through 42 says, Moreover, and King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. So King Antiochus, he sent his men to speak deceitfully to Yasharal. And many of them went for it. And it was also Antiochus, who was like this anti-Messiah type in this story, who performed Satan's will, which was to kill anyone who was obedient to Yahuwah. And after this, Antiochus, he makes it a law that no one can read the Torah. He outlawed the Shabbat, the feast days. They weren't allowed to go to the temple anymore. They weren't allowed to perform ascending smoke offerings or sacrifices. They were forced to break the dietary commands or be killed. And the punishment for doing any of these things, like obeying the Torah or the feast days or the Shabbat, the punishment for doing any of that and being caught was death. So, was it better to die for Yahuwah or obey the words of men? Well, for many, it was better to obey the words of men, as we see in this story. And we'll see this in the latter days as well. And we're going to get to that towards the end of this. First Maccabees 1, 43 through 50 says, Yea, many also of Yasharal consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Shabbat. For the king had sent Sepharim by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Yahud, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid ascending smoke offerings, and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Shabbats and the feast days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and Asherah poles and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also lead their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the Torah, and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, he should die. The king also sent commandment throughout the cities of Jerusalem that everyone was to sacrifice unto Antiochus' god, which was Zeus. And city by city, they set up the abomination of desolation, which was an altar and sacrifices for Zeus and all these other false gods inside of the temple of Yahuwah. And they found the Torah scrolls there, and they burnt them. They burnt them all. First Maccabees 1, 56 says, And when they had rent the pieces of the Sepharim of the Torah, which they found, they burnt them with fire. So Yahuwah began setting his wrath against Yasharal for disobeying him and for forsaking his Torah. But, as we see at the end of the story, his wrath is turned into mercy. Similarly, we see the same story unfold in the last days. Though Yahuwah will have wrath on the world, he will have mercy upon his people who are called faithful and chosen. First Maccabees 1:64, and there was very great wrath upon Yasharal. Now, for one family in Jerusalem, this was not going to fly, and they made it known. That family would be a man named Matthew and his 5 sons. Yochanan, which is John Caddis, Shimon Thassi, Yehuda, which is Judah Maccabee, Eleazar Avaron, and Jonathan Aphas. And Matthew, their father, was very upset to see what was happening in Yasharal, to see the people were sacrificing to idols and forsaking the Torah. And when he was asked if he was going to sacrifice to an idol and obey the king's command, he replied with this. First Maccabees 2:19 through 22. Then Mittiyahu answered and spoke with a loud voice, though all the nations are under the king's dominion obey him, and fall away everyone from their faith of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. Far be it that we should forsake the Torah and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our faith, either on the right hand or the left. So after refusing the king's commandment, Matthew and his sons knew that they could not remain in Jerusalem. They would be killed. So they fled to the mountains, and many who were still zealous for the Torah, they followed him into the wilderness. Now, mind you, this entire story takes place over like a 10-year time span. It begins in the 137th year of the kingdom of Greece, and it ends in the 148th year, actually, of the kingdom of Greece. So those obedient to the Torah, they dwelt in the mountains in the wilderness for at least 10, 11 years, and a lot of them died. First Maccabees 2:27 through 30. And Mattiyahu cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, Whosoever is zealous of the Torah and maintains the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains, and left all that they had in the city. Then many that sought after justice and judgment went down into the wilderness to dwell there, both they and their children and their women and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore upon them. So the king got word, and he made war with them on the Shabbat, in which in which day they refused to go out and fight and profane the Shabbat. And 1,000 people died that day at the hands of Antiochus and the Grecian army. 1 Maccabees 2, 31 through 38. Now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem, in the city of David, that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness, they pursued after them a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them, and they made war against them on the Shabbat. And they said unto them, Let that which ye have done hitherto suffice. Come forth and do according to the commandment of the king, and ye shall live. But they said, We will not come forth, neither will we do the king's commandment to profane the Shabbat. So then they gave them the battle with all speed. Howbeit they answered them not, neither cast a stone at them, nor stopped the places where they lay hid, but said, Let us all die in our innocency. Heaven and earth will testify for us that ye put us to death wrongfully. So they rose up against them in the battle on the Shabbat, and they slew them with their women and children and their cattle to the number of 1,000 people. So Matthew and his sons and the other men within the group, they agreed that the next time the Greeks came to war with them on the Shabbat, that they would fight back and they would not let that happen again. Matthew said if that happened again, that the children of Yasharal and the Torah would be quickly rooted out of the earth. So lucky for them, a group of Hasidians stumbled upon them, a group of men who were strong and devoted to the Torah, and they were also fleeing persecution, and they joined Matthew and his sons. 1 Maccabees 2, 39 through 44. Now when Mattityahu and his friends understood thereof, they mourned for them right sore. And one of them said to another, If we all do as our brethren have done, and fight not for our lives and Torah against the heathen, they will now quickly root us out of the earth. At that time, therefore, they decreed, saying, Whosoever shall come to make battle with us on the Shabbat, we will fight against him. Neither will we die all, as our brethren that were murdered in the secret places. Then came unto him a company of Hasidians, who were mighty men of Yasharal. Even all such were voluntarily devoted unto the Torah. And all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them, and were a stay unto them. So they joined their forces, and smote sinful men in their anger, and wicked men in their wrath. But the rest fled to the heathen for help. And then 1 Maccabees 2:48 also says, So they recovered the Torah out of the hand of the other nations, and out of the hand of kings, neither suffered they the sinner to triumph. So they also recovered the Torah, or, what was left of the Torah that didn't get burnt, from the hand of the other nations. And then they would hide in the caves, and they would read the Torah. And then it comes time for Matthew to die. And that's actually, too, that's where the game of the dreidel came from. They would have these spin tops, and when the Greeks would patrol the caves, if they were reading the Torah and like a Greek soldier was coming, they would hide their Torah scrolls, and they would bring this little dreidel out and pretend like they were playing a game. So anyways, and then it comes time for Matthew to die, and he calls his sons to bless them. And this blessing he speaks to his sons is truly what I believe the heart of the story, and the heart of is the heart of this story, and the heart of the story that should be playing out in our lives right now, in this very moment in time. Let's read that blessing he gives to his sons. 1 Maccabees 2, 49 through 70. Now when the time drew near that Mattityahu should die, he said unto his sons, Now his pride and rebuke gotten strength, and the time of destruction, and the wrath of indignation. Now therefore, my sons, be ye zealous for the Torah, and give your lives for the covenant of your fathers. Call to remembrance what acts our fathers did in their time. So shall ye receive great honor and an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in temptation, and it was imputed unto him for righteousness? Joseph in the time of his distress kept the commandment, and was made Adonai of Mizraim. Phinehach. Oh, that's a hard one to say. Our father, in being zealous and fervent, obtained the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. And Yahusha, for fulfilling the word, was made a judge in Yasharal. Caleb, was bearing witness before the assembly received the heritage of the land. David, for being merciful, possessed the throne of an everlasting kingdom. Eliyahu, for being zealous and fervent for the Torah, was taken up to heaven. Hanayahu, Azaryahu, and Mishael, by believing, were saved out of the flame. Daniel, for his innocency, was delivered from the mouth of lions. And thus consider ye throughout all ages, that none that put their trust in him shall be overcome. Fear not the words of a sinful man, for his glory shall be dung and worms. Today he shall be lifted up, and tomorrow he shall not be found, because he is returned into his dust, and his thought is come to nothing. Wherefore, ye my sons, be valiant, and show yourselves men in the behalf of the Torah, for by it ye obtain glory. And behold, I know that your brother Shimon is a man of counsel. Give ear unto him always. He shall be a father unto you. As for Yehuda Maccabee, he has been mighty and strong, even from his youth up. Let him be your captain, and fight for the battle of the people. Take also unto you all those that observe the Torah, and avenge ye the wrong of your people. Recompense fully the heathen, and take heed to the commandments of the Torah. So he blessed them, and was gathered to his fathers. And he died in the 146th year, and his sons buried him in the sepulchre of his fathers at Modin. And all Yasharal made a great lamentation for him. So consider all the battles and all the struggles that our forefathers faced, and overcame all of them. Consider how none who put their trust in Yahuwah shall be taken over. So don't fear the words of sinful men. Dust they are, and to dust they return. One day they're here, the next day they're gone, and his words die with him. But Yahuwah and his Torah is eternal forever, and in his Torah we find true glory, the glory of the Father. So be valiant for the Torah. And then he makes Shimon a counselor, and Judah is the captain of battle. And I'm not sure why he didn't bless his other sons, to be honest with you, or maybe it just got lost in translations over the year. I'm not sure. But anyways, it doesn't take away from the integrity of this story. So, and Judah is described as a lion in battle. He definitely lives up to his namesake. And the heathen feared him because deliverance prospered in his hand. He was a mighty warrior for Yahuwah. And kind of like his namesake, Judah, the son of Jacob was. Jacob was a lion's whelp. 1 Maccabees 3, 4-6. In his acts, he was like a lion, like a lion's whelp roaring for his prey. For he pursued the wicked and sought them out, and burnt up those that vexed his people. Wherefore the wicked shrunk for fear of him, and all the workers of iniquity were troubled, because Yeshua prospered in his hand. Judah Maccabee goes on to fight a couple of kings with his army, and he defeats them, because Yahuwah fights for him. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I will say that after slaying Apollonius, the king of Sumeria, Judah Maccabee fought with Apollonius' sword for the rest of his days. When Antiochus, the king of Greece, heard of this, he was extremely angry. He was ready to pay his soldiers in advance to go to war with Judah Maccabee. There was only one problem. He was broke. He spent too much of his money, and the land and the people also lay desolate. It was like a desert out there on account of the Torah being removed from the land. A lot of people had died. Plagues have fallen on the land. And homeboy spent too much money. So Antiochus decided to leave Greece and go to Persia and the other countries that he might gather up some money from anybody who was willing to lend to him. And he left his man Lysias in charge. 1 Maccabees 3, 27-32. Now when Antiochus heard these things, he was full of indignation. Wherefore he sent and gathered together all the forces of his realm, even a very strong army. He opened also his treasure, and gave his soldiers pay for a year, commanding them to be ready whensoever he should need them. Nevertheless, when he saw that the money of his treasures failed, and that the tributes of his country were small, because of dissension and plague, which he had brought upon the land, and taking away the Torah, which had been of old time, he feared that he should not be able to bear the charges any longer, nor to have such gifts to give so liberally as he did before. For he had abounded above the kings that were before him. Wherefore, being greatly perplexed in his mind, he determined to go into Persia, there to take tributes of the countries, and to gather much money. So he left Lysias, a nobleman, and one of the blood royal, to oversee the affairs of the king, from the river Parath unto the borders of Mizraim. 1 Maccabees 3, 34-36. Moreover, he delivered unto him half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him charge of all things that he would have done, as also concerning them that dwell in Yahud and Jerusalem, to wit, that he should send an army against them, to destroy and root out the strength of Yasharal, and take the remnant of Jerusalem, and to take away their memorial from that place, and that he should place strangers in all their quarters, and divide their land by lot. So we see as well, he leaves Lysias half of his forces, he leaves him the elephants, and he told him to raise up an army against the Yasharal and destroy them, to root them out and kill them, and then they'll give the land to strangers and divide it up by lot, to wipe out their memory in the earth. 1 Maccabees 3:37. So the king took half of the forces that remained, and he departed from Antioch. And I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. A lot of these names are hard to pronounce, y'all. His royal city, the 147th year, having passed the river Parath, he went through the high countries. And I just want to make note that this was in the 147th year of the Kingdom of Greece. So this story has been going on for about 10 years now. The story began in the 137th year of Greece. So Lysias gets Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, and they march down to Jerusalem. And on the way they stop in Yemen, where they meet some merchants who join forces with them. And as they wish to capture the children of Yasharal and sell them as slaves. So they are also joined by some forces from Aram and the Philistines, which is i.e. Palestine. And they all go down to Jerusalem together to make war with the children of Yasharal. 1 Maccabees 3:38 through 41. Then Lysias chose Ptolemy, the son of Dormenes, Nicanor, and Gorgias, I'm not sure how to, these names are so hard, y'all, mighty men of the king's friends. And with them he sent 40,000 men and 7,000 horsemen to go in the land of Yehud, and to destroy it as the king had commanded. So they went forth with all of their power and came and pitched by Yamin in the plain country. And the merchants of the country, hearing the fame of them, took silver and gold very much with servants, and came into the camp to buy the children of Yasharal for slaves. A power also of Aram and of the land of the Pelishtim joined themselves unto them. And 1 Maccabees 3:42 through 45. Now when Yehuda and his brethren saw that miseries were multiplied, and that the forces did encamp themselves in their borders, for they knew how the king had given commandment to destroy the people and utterly abolish them, they said to one another, "Let us restore the decayed fortune of our people, and let us fight for our people in the sanctuary." Then was the assembly gathered together, that they might be ready for battle, and that they might pray and ask mercy and compassion. Now Jerusalem lay void as a wilderness. There was none of her children that went in or out. The sanctuary was also trodden down, and aliens kept the stronghold. The heathen had their habitation in that place, and joy was taken from Yaakov, and the pipe with the harp seized. So, as you can see, it was some really rough times for Yahuwah's people, the remnant of them that was left. And similarly, we can see like the same kind of dynamic going on today. The world has been trodden down by wicked, oppressive men. Yahuwah's people are not as abundant as they were at one point, like in the days of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Jerusalem has no king right now. It is run by strangers. Our king is in heaven. The heathen have the habitation there, and throughout the entire world they have it. Joy has been removed from Jacob's people and replaced with grief and sorrow, and the pipe with the harp has ceased throughout the entire earth. Give me 1 second. All right, 1 Maccabees 3, 46 through 49. Wherefore Yasharal assembled themselves together, and came to Mitzpah, over against Jerusalem. For in Mitzpah was the place where they prayed aforetime in Yasharal. Then they fasted that day, and put on sackcloth, and cast ashes upon their heads, and rent their clothes, and laid open the Sefer of the Torah, wherein the heathen had sought to paint the likeness of their images. They brought also the priest's garments, and the firstfruits, and the tithes, and the Nazarim they stirred up, who had accomplished their days. So they got Nazarites who had fulfilled their vows. So they came over to Mitzpah, which I'm going to assume is probably a valley or something. I'm not sure. And they prayed, and they fasted, and they put on sackcloth. It was like a period of mourning and sorrow while they prayed and fasted. And then they took out the Torah, and they brought the priestly garments, and the firstfruits, and the tithes. Because around this time, when this is happening, this is actually happening around the time of, so yeah, this is the first battle, right? Yep, this is the first battle. Yeah, because then they come back a year later. So this is the first battle. And yeah, we'll get to that. They brought the first fruits and the tithes, and then they anointed the Nazarites who had completed their vows, and they anointed them to be priests. And for timeliness perspective, for timelines and all that, this was around the time of Shavuot. Since he mentioned the first fruits, this would be the first fruits of the wheat harvest, because we'll get to it later, but when we see the second battle that we're going to get into, it actually happens a little bit after Sukkot, and we'll get to all that. So let me just keep going. First Maccabees 3:50-54. And then they cried with a loud voice toward heaven, saying, What shall we do with these? And whither shall we carry them? For your sanctuary is trodden down and profane. Your priests are in heaviness and brought low. And lo, the heathen are assembled together against us to destroy us. What things they imagine against us you know. How shall we be able to stand against them, except you, O Elohim, be our help? Then sounded they with shofars, and cried with a loud voice. First Maccabees 3:55-60. And after this, Yehuda ordained captains over the people, even captains over thousands, and over hundreds, and over 50s, and over 10s. But as for such as were building houses, or had betrothed women, or were planting vineyards, or were fearful, those he commanded that they should return every man to his own house, according to the Torah. So the camp removed and pitched upon the south side of Yemim, which is Yemen. And Yehuda said, Arm yourselves, and be valiant men, and see that ye be in readiness against the morning, that ye may fight with these nations that are assembled together against us to destroy us in our sanctuary. For it is better for us to die in battle than to behold the calamities of our people in our sanctuary. Nevertheless, as the will of Elohim is in heaven, so let him do. So Gorgias, I don't know how to say his name. He was the commander of the Grecian army, and he sent 5,000 footmen and 1,000 of his best horsemen, and he left in the middle of the night. And he was trying to set up a sneak attack on Judah Maccabee and his army. And Judah and his men got word of this, and they left their camp, and they hid in the woods so they could slay Gorgias. I don't know how to say his name. I'm going to call him Gorgias. So he could slay them whenever they came. And then Gorgias and his men arose, and they found nobody there. They were all gone. And when the sun rose, Judah removed himself from the woods with 300 men who neither had armor or swords. And they went and they spied on the heathen camp. And the men who were with him, they were afraid. But Judah goes on to tell them to not be, because they have Yahuwah. First Maccabees 4:1-7. Then Gorgias, also I'm calling him Gorgias, y'all, took 5,000 footmen and 1,000 of the best horsemen, and removed out of the camp by night, to the end that he might rush in upon the camp of the Yahudim, and smite them suddenly. And the men of the fortress were his guides. Now when Yehuda heard thereof, he himself removed, and the valiant men with him, that he might smite the king's army, which was at Yemim, while as yet the forces were dispersed from the camp. In the mean season came Gorgias by night into the camp of Yehuda, and while he found no man there, he sought them in the mountains, for he said, These fellows flee from us. But as soon as it was day, Yehuda showed himself in the plain with 3,000 men. Oops, I said 300. I meant to say 3,000. Who nevertheless had neither armor nor swords to their minds. And they saw the camp of the heathen, and it was strong and well harnessed, and compassed round about with horsemen, and these were experts of war. And then 1 Maccabees 4:8-11. Then said Yehuda to the men that were with him, Fear ye not their multitude, neither be ye afraid of their assault. Remember how our fathers were delivered in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh pursued them with an army. Now therefore, let us cry unto heaven, if perchance Yahuwah will have mercy upon us, and remember the covenant with our fathers, and destroy this host from before our face this day, so that all the heathen may know that there is one who delivers and saves Yashrael. And then the battle begins. Judah and his men sounded the shofars, and it really scared the enemy when they did this, and they fled into the plains. And Judah and his men slayed the hindmost of the heathen army, about 3,000 men, and the rest fled away. And Judah and his men turned back, but so did Gorgias and his men. And Judah tells his men, Don't worry about the spoils, because this isn't over yet. Gorgias and his men are up in the mountain. Help me fight them, And then you can boldly take the spoils. And Judah looks up, and he sees some of them begin to appear in the mountain. And when they saw Judah and his men burning their tents and destroying their camp, a host, and then they also saw a host of Judah's men in the plain already there, ready to fight. They became really afraid, so they fled everyone into a stranger's land. And Judah and his men proceeded in taking the spoil and praising Yahuwah for their success against the enemy. 1 Maccabees 4, 12 through 25. Then the strangers lifted up their eyes and saw them coming over against them. Wherefore they went out of the camp to battle. But they that were joined with Yehuda sounded the shofars. So they joined battle, and the heathen, being discomfited, fled into the plain. Howbeit all the hindmost of them were slain with the sword. They pursued them unto Gazam, and unto the plains of Edom and Ashdod, and Yavneel. so that there were slain of them upon 3,000 men. This done, Yehuda returned again with his host from pursuing them, and said to the people, Be not greedy of the spoil, inasmuch as there is a battle before us, and Georgius and his hosts are here by us in the mountain. But stand ye now against your enemies, and overcome them, and after this ye may boldly take the spoils. As Yehuda was yet speaking these words, there appeared part of them looking out of the mountain, who, when they perceived that the Yahudim had put their host to flight, and were burning their tents, for the smoke that was seen declared what was done. When therefore they perceived these things, they were sore afraid, and seeing the host of Yehuda in the plain ready to fight, they fled everyone into the land of strangers. Then Yehuda returned to spoil the tents, where they got much gold and silver and blue silk and purple of the sea and great riches. And after this they went home and sung songs of thanksgiving and praised Yahuwah in heaven, because he is good, and his mercy endures forever. Thus Yasharal had a great deliverance that day. And then 1 Maccabees 4, 26 through 28. Now all the strangers that had escaped came and told Lysias what had happened, who when he had heard thereof was confounded and discouraged, because neither such thing as he would were done unto Yasharal, nor such things as the king commanded him were come to pass. The next year, therefore, following, Lysias gathered together 70,000 choice men of foot, and 5,000 horsemen, that he might subdue them. So the next year, in the 138th year, he goes back. So these men go back. They tell Lysias what happened, and he was really confused and discouraged about it. They had such a large army. They had elephants and a navy, etc. And Judah Maccabee had such a small army, but they had Yahuwah. So the next year, 1 year later, Lysias sends 60,000 footmen and 5,000 horsemen. 1 Maccabees 4:29. So they came into Edom and pitched their tents at Beit Sirah, and Yehuda met with them 10,000 men. So Lysias sent 60,000 footmen and 5,000 horsemen, and Judah shows up with only 10,000 men compared to their 60,500 men. And then Judah prayed to Yahuwah to deliver them from the hand of the heathen and to give them success, as he has given all his servants success. 1 Maccabees 4, 34 through 35. So they joined battle, and there were slain of the host of Lysias about 5,000 men. Even before them were they slain. Now when Lysias saw his army put to flight, and the manliness of Yehuda's soldiers, and how they were ready to either live or die valiantly, he went into Antioch, and gathered together a company of strangers, and having made his army greater than it was, he proposed to come again into Yehuda. So Judah and his men slayed 5,000 of Lysias' men, like right off the rip. As soon as it starts, right off the bat, 5,000 men were gone. As soon as it started, boom, they were dead. When Lysias saw the manliness of Judah's soldiers, how they were ready to live or die so valiantly, it scared him. So he went to go get more men to add to his numbers, like any men, random men, like it didn't matter, he just anybody. And while Lysias was off doing that, Judah and his men decided to go to the sanctuary to go cleanse it and rededicate it to Yahuwah. And right now, it was taken over by the heathen Greeks, and they were using it to worship Zeus and other gods, and they were sacrificing pigs on the altar, and all kinds of craziness. 1 Maccabees 4, 36 through 41. Then said Yehuda and his brethren, Behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. Upon this, all the hosts assembled themselves together and went up to Mount Sion. And when they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and the shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest, or in one of the mountains, yea, and the priest chambers pulled down, they rent their clothes, and made a great lamentation, and cast ashes upon their heads, and they fell down flat on the ground upon their faces, and they blew an alarm with the shofars, and cried toward heaven. And then Yehuda appointed certain men to fight against those who were in the fortress, until he had cleansed the sanctuary. However, they got to the top of the mountain, and they saw the sanctuary had been partially destroyed. The things of Yahuwah had been stolen, the altar had been profaned, Antiochus was using it to sacrifice swine, the gates were burned up, the shrubs were overgrown and had not been taken care of, the priest chambers had been pulled down. So Judah and his men, they rent their clothes, and they sobbed, they cast ashes on their head, and they blasted the shofars. And at this time, Lysias came back with those random men that didn't make any difference. So Judah told some of his men to go back into the city and fight, while he appointed priests and had the sanctuary cleansed. 1 Maccabees 4:42-43. So he chose priests of blameless conversation, such as had pleasure in the Torah, who cleansed the sanctuary and bore out the defiled stones into an unclean place. So first he chose priests who were blameless in conversation, meaning they never spoke badly or foul-mouthed, never spoke ungodly, etc. And they took pleasure in the Torah. The things they spoke were things of the Torah. 1 Maccabees 4:44-47. And when they consulted what to do with the altar of ascending smoke offerings, which was profane, they thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathen had defiled it. Wherefore they pulled it down, and laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to show what should be done with them. Then they took whole stones according to the Torah, and they built a new altar according to the former. Now they decided it was best to tear down the old altar, since it had been defiled by pagan worship and unclean animals, or risk leaving it, and it becomes a reproach to them. So they laid up the stones in the mountain. They disassembled the old altar, and the stones from the old altar, they laid it up in a convenient place in a mountain of the temple, until the prophet could come and tell them what to do with them, how to properly, get rid of them. So then they took more stones, new stones, according to the Torah, and they built a new altar according to the Torah, or the instruction of the former altar. 1 Maccabees 4:48-51. And they made up the sanctuary and the things that were within the temple, and they hallowed the courts, and they made also new holy vessels. And into the temple they brought the menorah, and the altar of ascending smoke offerings, and of incense, and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were upon the menorah they lighted, that they might give light into the temple. Furthermore, they set the loaves upon the table, and spread out the veils, and finished all the works which they had begun to make. So they made up the sanctuary and all the things that were in the sanctuary. They hallowed, or made holy, the courts, and they made new holy vessels, and they brought in a new menorah, and the altar of ascending smoke offerings and of incense, and they made a new table for the showbread. And upon this altar they burned incense, and they lit the lamps of the menorah, so that they might have light in the temple, i.e. bringing Yahuwah's Torah back into Yasharal. And they set the loaves of bread on the tables, and they hung the veils, and they also hung new doors. 1 Maccabees 4:52. Now on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month of Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up early in the morning. So this happened in the Hebrew month of Kislev, which is our November, December. It is the month of Kislev right now. We are actually I think today is the 7th. I can go tell you right now. I got my calendar right over here. Today is the 16th of Kislev. Okay. And this day can come as early as November 28th and as late as December 27th. It depends on, the year. It depends when the year starts. If it starts in March or if it starts in April, because we all know the year starts with Pesach, Passover. So it just all depends on if Passover is in March or April that year. Okay, so yeah, this year Hanukkah begins on December 8th, at least on the calendar that I follow. Anyways, 1 Maccabees 4:53-56. and offered sacrifice according to the Torah upon the new altar of ascending smoke offerings which they had made. Look at what time and what day the heathen had profaned it. Even in that it was dedicated with songs and cisterns and harps and cymbals. And then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the Elohim of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered ascending smoke offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. So they offered their first sacrifice on their new rededicated altar. And in the selfsame day that the heathen destroyed and profaned Yahuwah's temple, his children came and restored it and rededicated it according to his Torah. And they played music, and they sang songs to him, and they worshipped, and they gave thanks, and they kept the dedication of the altar for 8 days. And we're going to learn why they kept it for 8 days in the second book of Maccabees. And no, it isn't because of some oil miracle. As I said earlier, that story didn't come until around 600 years later in the Babylonian Talmud. That story wasn't even around in Yahusha's time. And Yahusha was only born 160 years after the Maccabean revolt. First Maccabees 4:57 through 61. They decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and hanged doors upon them. Thus there was a very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Yehuda and his brethren, the whole assembly of Yasharal, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Kislev, with mirth and gladness. At that time they also built upon Mount Sion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the other nations should come and tread it down as they had done before. And they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified Beit Surah to guard it, that they might have also a defense against Edom. So now I want to get into Second Maccabees, but we're definitely not going to be going through the whole thing. But I do definitely recommend taking the time to go back through and read it. It actually goes a little bit more in depth as far as like the backstory and the war and everything. Like it gives a little bit more detail and kind of gives like a little bit more like context too. But we, however, are going to cut to the chase. But I first want to share something that I did find interesting that was said in 2nd Maccabees. 2nd Maccabees 5:19 through 20. Nevertheless, Elohim did not choose the people for the place's sake, but the place for the people's sake. And therefore the place itself, that was a partaker with them of the adversity that happened to the nation, did afterward communicate in the benefits sent from Yahuwah. And as it was forsaken in the wrath of El Shaddai, so again the great Yahuwah being reconciled, it was set up with all glory. So it's interesting. Yahuwah didn't choose Yasharal for the sake of the temple. He chose the temple for the sake of the people, meaning the temple of Yahuwah, it didn't need the children of Yasharal. But the children of Yasharal, they needed the temple. It was where Yahuwah's spirit dwelt at that time. And that place, the temple, was also a partaker in the abominations that happened to the nation, like when the Greeks were in there worshiping their pagan gods. But afterward, it also communicated the benefits of serving Yahuwah with all your heart, mind, and soul. As it was forsaken in the wrath of Yahuwah, it will also once again be reconciled in all glory. And it made me think of these two scriptures. These two scriptures come to mind when I read that passage. First is Isaiah 54:7. It says, "For a small moment I have forsaken you, but with great mercies will I gather you." And then Ezekiel 38:8. After many days you shall be visited. In the latter years you shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Yasharal, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely in all of them. So it's really interesting that it says that, because those were the first two scriptures that came to mind after I read that. 2 Maccabees 1:7 through 12. What time as Demetrius reigned, in the 169th year, we the Yahudim wrote unto you in the extremity of trouble that came upon us in those years, from the time that Yason and his company revolted from the Holy Land and kingdom, and burned the porch, and shed innocent blood. Then we prayed unto Yahuwah, and were heard. We offered also sacrifices and fine flour, and lighted the lamps, and set forth loaves. And now see that ye keep the feast of Hanukkah in the month of Kislev, in the 168th year. The people that were at Jerusalem and Yehuda, and the council and Yehuda, sent greeting and health unto Aristobulus and King Ptolemy's master, who was of the stock of the anointed priests, and to the Yahudim that were in Mizraim, so much so as Elohim has delivered us from great perils. We thank him highly, as having been in battle against a king, for he cast them out that fought within the holy city. Now,
I know my dad's stuff. Okay? From now on,
I'm sorry, excuse me, guys.
Good.
Now, if you want to, you can go through and read 2nd Maccabees if you would like a deeper study into this. But we're going to get straight to the point here. Why is Hanukkah 8 days? How is Yahusha relevant here? And is there any foreshadowing going on here within this memorial period of time? Firstly, let's understand why they kept Hanukkah for 8 days. And this was because they had just previously kept Sukkot in the mountains, hiding inside of caves. Sukkot is also 8 days. So they kept the dedication 8 days. Also, because when Solomon and Nehemiah performed their dedication ceremonies, Nehemiah's was only 1 day, but Solomon's was 8 days. We'll get to that in just a minute. 2nd Maccabees 2:10-12. And as when Moshe prayed unto Yahuwah, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifices, even so prayed Shalomah also, and the fire came down from heaven and consumed the ascending smoke offerings. And Moshe said, because the sin offering was not to be eaten, it was consumed. So Shalomah kept those 8 days. And then 2nd Maccabees 2:13-14. The same things also were reported in the writings and commentaries of Nehemyahu. Ugh, that's a tongue twister. And how he, founding a library, gathered together the acts of the kings and the prophets and of David, and the Sepharim concerning the kings, and the Sepharim of kings concerning the holy gifts. In like manner also Yehuda gathered together all those things that were lost by reason of the war we had, and they remain with us. So what are they referring to here? We'll get to that in just a minute. I want to read down to line 18, 2nd Maccabees 2:16-18. Whereas we then are about to celebrate the purification, we have written unto you, and ye shall do well if ye keep the same days. We hope also that the Elohim that delivered all his people and gave them all a heritage, and the kingdom, and the priesthood, and the sanctuary, as he promised in the Torah, will shortly have mercy upon us, and gather us together out of every land under heaven into the holy place. For he has delivered us out of great troubles, and has purified the place. So is there any foreshadowing going on here? Personally, I believe so. At first, I didn't. When I first started studying this out, I didn't think there was any kind of foreshadowing or any significance to this day, but it's mostly because I didn't really know anything about this day or the story behind it or anything. But the more I do and the more I study, the more I am led to believe that there is some future meaning going on here. Soon Yahuwah is going to have mercy on his people, and he is going to gather them. And I think that the purifying is what we're seeing right now. All the war and senseless killing. The earth is beginning to be cleansed. A lot of blood is shed before Yahusha shows up and cleanses the earth with fire. First, all of the kings rise up against each other and they start killing each other. People start killing their own people. Countries turn on their own citizens. It gets real crazy. The lands will lay desolate. There'll be a hissing, a reproach. And I'm not 100% on this, so just bear with me. I'm still studying all this out, but so far, this is where the Spirit has been leading me to. Now, back to these other scriptures. What were they referring to about Solomon and Nehemiah? Well, let's look. 2 Chronicles 7, 1 through 10. Now when Shalomah had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the ascending smoke offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of Yahuwah filled the house. And the priests could not enter into the house of Yahuwah, because the glory of Yahuwah had filled Yahuwah's house. And when all the children of Yasharal saw how the fire came down, and how the glory of Yahuwah upon the house, they bowed themselves with their faces to the ground upon the pavement and worshipped, and praised Yahuwah, saying, For he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Then the king and all the people offered sacrifices before Yahuwah. And Shalomah offered a sacrifice of 22,000 oxen, and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all of the people dedicated the house of Elohim. And the priests waited on their offices, the Leviim also with the instruments of music of Yahuwah, which David the king had made to praise Yahuwah, because his mercy endures forever. When David praised by their ministry, and the priests sounded the trumpets before them, and all Yasharal stood. Moreover, Shalomah hallowed the middle of the court that was before the house of Yahuwah. For there he offered ascending smoke offerings, and the fat of the peace offerings, because the brazen altar which Shalomah had made was not able to receive the ascending smoke offerings, and the oblations, and the fat. Also at that time Shalomah kept the feast 7 days, and all Yasharal with him, a very great assembly, from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Mitzrayim. And in the 8th day they made a solemn assembly, for they kept the dedication of the altar 7 days, and the feast 7 days. And on the 23rd day of the 7th month he sent the people away into their tents, glad and merry in heart, for the goodness that Yahuwah had showed unto David, and unto Shalomah, and unto Yasharal his people. So at this time, when Solomon hallowed the courts of the temple, and he dedicated the altar, just like we saw in the Maccabees story, Solomon was also observing the feast of Sukkot. We got that by it being in the 7th month. And the feast lasted 8 days. There's only one feast in the 7th month that lasts 8 days, and that is Sukkot. So as you can see as well, the scripture says that Solomon and the children of Yasharal were not just keeping the feast, they were also keeping the dedication of the altar for those 8 days as well. They were celebrating that. And Yahuwah had no issue with that. He blessed Solomon and made his covenant with him literally in the verses right after this. So now let's look at Nehemiah, as testimony is based on 2 to 3 witnesses, right? Nehemiah 12, 36 through 47. So I'm about to be reading a lot of names here, okay? We're about to go through a bunch of names of all the priests. These were in the days of Joachim, the son of Yeshua, the son of Yahutzadak. I think I said that right. Yahutzadik? I don't know. I'm gonna go with Yahutzadik. That sounds better. And in the days of Nehemiah, the governor, and of Ezra, the priest, the scribe, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Leviim out of their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings, and with singing, and with cymbals, and psalteries, and with harps. And the sons of the singers gathered themselves together, both out of the plain country, round about Jerusalem, and from the villages of Netofal, I'm not sure how to say that place. Also from Beit Hagigal, and out of the fields of Jiva, and out of Asmaveth. For the singers had built them villages round about Jerusalem, and the priests and the Leviim purified themselves, and purified the people, and the gates, and the wall. Then I brought up the princes of Yehuda upon the wall, and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks, whereof one went on the right hand upon the wall, toward the dung gate, and after them went Hushaiah, half of the princes of Yehuda, and Azaryahu, Ezra, Meshulam, Yehuda, Benjamin, Shemayahu, and Yeremiyahu, and certain of the priest's sons with trumpets, namely Zachariahu, the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemayahu, the son of Mattanyahu, the son of Micaiahu, the son of Zachor, the son of Akaf, and his brethren, Shemayahu, and Azarel, and Milalai, and Gilalai, and May, and Nathaniel, and Yehuda, and Hani, with musical instruments of David, the man of Elohim, and Ezra the scribe before them. And at the fountain gate which was over them, they went up the stairs of the city of David, and going going up of the wall above the house of David, even unto the water gate eastward. And the other company of them that gave thanks went over against them, and I after them. And the half of the people upon the wall, from beyond the tower of the furnaces, even unto the broad wall, and from above the gate of Ephraim, and above the old gate, and above the fish gate, and above the tower of Hanal, and the tower of Mea, even unto the sheep gate, and they stood still in the prison gate. So stood the two companies of them that gave thanks in the house of Elohim, and I, and the half of the rulers with me, and the priests, Elakim, Mesenyahu, Minyamin, Mikiyahu, Eliyahu, Ayani, I'm not sure, I don't think I said that right, Zachariahu, and Hanayahu, with trumpets, and Masayahu, and Shemayahu, and Eleazar, and Uzi, and Yehukanan, and Malkiyahu, and Elam, and Ezer. And the singers sang loud, with Yizrach, their overseer. And also that day they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for Elohim had made them rejoice with great joy. The women also and the children rejoiced, so the joy of Jerusalem was heard even afar off. And at that time were some appointed over the chambers for treasures, and for the offerings, for the firstfruits, and for the tithes, to gather them out of the fields of the cities of the portions of the Torah, for the priests of the Leviim. For Yehuda rejoiced for the priests and for the Leviim that waited. Both the singers and the porters guarded the ward of their Elohim, and the ward of purification, according to the commandment of David, and of Shalomo his son. For in the days of David and Akaph of old there were chief singers, and songs of praise and thanksgiving unto Elohim. And Al Yasharal in the days of Zerubbabel, and in the days of Nehemiah, gave portions of the singers and their porters every day his portion, and they sanctified the holy things unto the Leviim, and the Leviim sanctified them unto the children of Aaron. So here it sounds like they only kept one day, and it was kept after Sukkot, sometime after Sukkot too. Like it was like at least a 2-3 week space there after Sukkot. But keep in mind that this was just the dedication of the new wall around Jerusalem. This was not the dedication of the altar. And I'd also like to add that the original dedication of the altar lasted for 12 days. And I'm not going to share that because it's pretty long, but you can go read it in Numbers chapter 7. And the reason that it was 12 days long is because each day one of the 12 tribes of Jacob would come to Aaron and the Levites to offer sacrifices. And really quick, let me show y'all how the Maccabees mentioned that they kept the 8 days because they had just recently observed Sukkot a couple months prior. 2 Maccabees 10, 1 through 8. Now Yehuda Maccabee and his company, Yahuwah guiding them, recovered the temple in the city. But the altars, which the heathen had built in the open street, and also the chapels, they pulled down. And having cleansed the temple, they made another altar. And striking stones, they took fire out of them, and offered sacrifice after 2 years, and set forth incense, and lights, and showbread. And when that was done, they fell flat down, and besought Yahuwah. So this war was kind of like ongoing for 2 years. It was like a 2-year war. Like, I know it says he waited a year later and sent more people back, but I don't know. It's kind of just silly to think that he wouldn't be terrorizing them in the meantime, you know? Like, we can kind of see that kind of thing going on right now in the world. Just, look at what's happening overseas. Anyways, when that was done, they fell flat down and besought Yahuwah that they might come no more into such troubles. But if they sinned any more against him, that he himself would chasten them with mercy, and that they might not be delivered unto the blasphemous and barbarous nations. Now upon the same day the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again, even the 25th day of the same month, which is Kislev. And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the feast of Sukkot, remembering that not long afore they had held the feast of Sukkot, when as they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts. Therefore they bore branches, and fair boughs, and palms also, and sang psalms unto him that had given them good success in cleansing his place. They ordained also by a common statute and decree that every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Yahudim. So, as you can see, the first Hanukkah, and probably all others until the Jewish sages showed up 600 years later, it resembled that of Sukkot. It was a huge Thanksgiving, and something that has been done before. We saw that with Solomon. Previously, for the last 11 years, they lived in caves and had to worship Yahuwah in secret. The Torah was near rooted out from the land. Yahuwah's people had truly grown very few in number. It was easier to conform than it was to hide, and that's why a lot of people just went over to the other side. And in the same day that the heathen tore up Yahuwah's temple, Yahuwah's people came in and fixed it up. And they did so according to his Torah. And they offered sacrifices according to his Torah. The Torah had been restored. Yahuwah tabernacled with his people once more. They didn't have to worship him in secret anymore. They had a lot to thank him for on this day. And he really lended them a stretched out hand. And personally, I believe this great success given by Yahuwah is worth remembering. That's personally just me. Now let's talk about Yahusha. Did Yahusha approve or disapprove of Hanukkah? And that's hard to say because there's only one verse that mentions it, and that is John 10:22. And we're going to read both 10:20. We're going to read 22 and 23. And it was at Yerushalayim, the feast of Hanukkah, and it was winter, and Yahusha walked into the temple on Shalom's porch. So the first thing I want to say here is the fact that Yahusha thought it was important to be in Jerusalem at this particular time says something. As we know, the priests, they all came to Jerusalem every year for the 3 major feast days per the Torah. So it's interesting that Yahusha made this journey to Jerusalem for Hanukkah. It was in the winter, which was pretty cold in Israel. And he lived in Galilee, which is not very close to Jerusalem at all, especially when you're walking or riding on a donkey. So that's the first thing I want to make note of. Second thing is interesting is that it mentions it's winter, because it got me thinking, and then this scripture came to mind as I was pondering on that. It was Matthew 24:20. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Shabbat. And 2 things happened here in the Maccabees story. It started off with them not wanting to fight on the Shabbat, and then they lost 1,000 people. And then the second half of the battle, where they finally get to rededicate the temple, it happens in the dead middle of winter. It's freezing over there. So, Yahusha was talking about events that would take place before the Great Tribulation, as spoken of by Daniel. And he said that many people will flee at the sight of these events coming. Yahuwah's people will recognize the signs, and they will flee to the mountains. And then he says that pray when this happens that it's not in the winter or on the Shabbat, which is interesting because, as I said, seeing this battle against Yahuwah's people took place in the winter. And this Greek king, Antiochus, he's like an anti-Messiah type in this story. He defiled the temple, and he led all of Yahuwah's people astray. And he made it sound really good. He was like, I think we should just all be one people. We should all just be one, and we should all get along. But hey, you gotta forsake everything that you know first, and then we can all be one people. We can be friends, and I won't kill ya. This sounds like a crap deal. Anyways, so I truly think that having a deep understanding of this story and its characters, the people within the story, will help unlock future events in the end time. I really do. I really believe that Yahuwah has me on to something here, and I'm still just kind of trying to fit all the pieces together. But anyways, Yahusha uses this memorial celebration, because I'm not going to call it a feast day. I'm not holding this to the same regard as the Leviticus 23 feast days. This is like a memorial, just something to remember and reflect back on. Something like that. Okay, this is not a feast day. This is not a high day. There are no Sabbaths during this, unless one of the days happens to fall on the Shabbat, the weekly Shabbat. Anyways, so Yahusha uses this memorial celebration to finally reveal his identity as the Messiah, to which the religious leaders, the Pharisees, did not like, and they wanted to stone him. John 10:24-31. Then came the Yahudim round about him, and said unto him, How long do you make us to doubt? If you be Hamashiach, tell us plainly. Yahusha answered them, I told you, and ye believe not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me, but ye believe not, because ye are not of my sheep. As I said unto you, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father, which gave them to me, is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are Yahad. Echad. Yeah, Echad.
Yes, I am. Please do this for me.
Which means one. Him and his Father are one. Then the Yahudim took up stones again to stone him. So I want to say that it's really interesting too that during what they call the Feast of Dedication or the Festival of Dedication, Yahusha was trying to get people to rededicate themselves to Yahuwah. He said those things in hopes that it was planting a seed and waking people up. He called them not his sheep. And, maybe even just one person out of that crowd that he said that to, maybe even just one person pondered what he said. And didn't, they wanted to stone him. But if they would have took the time to just sit there and think about what he said, just take a minute to marinate and let it soak up, they would have understood that they were being led falsely. Their teachers were false teachers, and they were making things up. So, anyways. And the last two things I want to say is Hanukkah is sometimes referred to as the Festival of Lights as well, because the menorah brought the continual light of Yahuwah back into the temple. And in the Torah, Yahuwah told Moses and Aaron to keep the menorah lit continually. And the menorah represents the 7 spirits of Yahuwah. There are 7 branches on a menorah, and there are 7 spirits of Yahuwah, his light. Yahusha is also referred to as the light of the world. And here are the commands from the Torah about the menorah. Leviticus 24:2. Command the children of Yasharal that they bring unto you pure oil olive beaten for the light, to cause the lamps to burn continually. And Leviticus 24:4. He shall order the lamps upon the pure menorah before Yahuwah continually. And then Yahusha, who is the light of the world. John 8:12. Then spoke Yahusha again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And then John 9:5. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And John 12:46-47. I am come a light into the world, that whosoever believes on me should not abide in darkness. And if any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. So, and the last thing I wanted to leave you guys with, to kind of marinate on this, is it is widely suspected that Yahusha was born on Sukkot, or around Sukkot. And we know this by studying the priestly rotations during the time that John the Baptist was born. John the Baptist was born around the time of Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, somewhere in that time frame. Okay, and Yahusha was born 6 months after John the Baptist, which puts you in September. Sukkot is always in the months of September to the beginning of October. Now, Hanukkah is usually always in early to mid-December. Sometimes it can be in November, but it's usually always in December. If you count 9 months from December, you guessed it, September. So I find it very interesting that light came into the world on or around the time of the Festival of Lights, the light of man. And did you know that at the moment of conception, they actually just recently discovered this, I just watched a video about this not too long ago, that the moment of conception, there is literally a small, very quick flash of light. And Yahusha actually told us that too. And science is just now catching up with him. John 1:9. That was the true light, which lights every man that comes into the world. So, with that said, Keep the memorial, don't keep the memorial. The choice is up to you. I'm just here to offer information since there is so much inserted doctrine around this day. And also at this time, it had only been about 160 years roughly since the Maccabean revolt against the Greeks. So the fabled story about the oil wasn't around yet. It didn't come for like another, I don't know, 400 and some odd years after that. The story of the oil is a relatively new thing and completely untrue. As I said at the beginning, had that happened, you would think that the Maccabees would note such a miracle. I mean, what you do with all this information is up to you, brothers and sisters. But at the very least, I do hope that I sparked your curiosity to ask more questions, at least, and learn a little bit more about this memorial. When I finish this study, I think I will make another follow-up video with my findings. And I do want to say that if you are going to observe this memorial feast, kind of keep it close to Sukkot. And if you're going to do a menorah, don't get the 9-branch menorah. Get the 7-branch menorah. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm getting a 9-branch one this year, and that's only because it's cheaper. So I have children, small children, and I also have cats. And I can't get a real menorah with real candles, and getting the battery candles is just a little too expensive for me right now. So I'm just getting a battery operated one for this year, and then next year I'll have one with some battery operated candles. But I can't do real candles. My cats will set my house on fire. I will wake up to my house in flames, especially my little kitten. My little kitten is my little troublemaker. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and close this up with a prayer, guys. Yahuwah, thank you for allowing me to be able to share this information, and please continue to guide me in my studies. Soften my brethren's hearts, Yahuwah, and I pray that they ask you more questions about this day. May all knowledge and all clarity come from you, Yahuwah. Your knowledge and wisdom is far superior than ours, and please continue to bless your servants with the gift of your wisdom, and keep your wing over them, Yahuwah, and prepare them for what is to come. In Yahusha's name we pray. Amen. Okay, brothers and sisters, well, I hope you enjoyed this interesting little study that I put together. Not sure when I'll be back. Probably when I finish my Hanukkah study. I'll let you guys get a little update. But enjoy the rest of y'all's Shabbat and Shalom.